Righto then. So we have seen a whole bunch of stuff so far in the foundation section. We've seen all of the basic properties of materials, how it all goes into PBR workflow. We've seen a handful of little details on some of the settings that exist in LightWave 2018. We've seen a few details for some of the allowances that are made for PBR in 2018. And we've taken a brief cursory look at the history of doing PBR in previous versions of LightWave. So what we're going to do now to wrap up this whole foundation section is we're going to have a quick start run through of getting started in LightWave 2018 and just rendering some basic things. Do be aware that as we go through this video, we're not going to talk in detail about many of the settings and switches that we're using. They will get a much more detailed explanation coming up in the tools and techniques sections of the tutorials. That said, for starting out, observing some of the things that we do here will give you a beginning handle on some of the stuff you need to look for and the panels that you're going to be looking at in 2018. And that'll help you get started that way. So we're going to do this in sort of two little pieces. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a pre-2018 scene and we're going to bring that in because of course the renderer has changed and so there are going to be adjustments and changes that need to be made. So we'll give you a overview of bringing your pre-2018 LightWave work into the new render and making a few adjustments, and then we'll take a quick look at just setting up a scene from scratch in 2018. So we're going to start out with bringing the earlier work in, and this is the old marbles benchmark scene from the previous LightWave content going back I think to version 11. We see it here in LightWave 2015 and this is it just loaded up and VPR turned on, and this is how it comes out. As we can see, we've got a few surfaces here. If we look at some of the nodes, and we've got various things like dielectric that's in there. What else have we got? More dielectric. Some car paint here with various bits of procedurals hooked up. Slightly different surface here that's using kappa and a reflection shader. You'll find, of course, these are not present in 2018, so we'll see how to replace some surfacing there. And so having taken a basic look at that, let's get started. So here we have our benchmark marble scene. Let's bring that in. You'll notice that one of the things that you get when you load up an old scene into 2018 is you get this loading older scene version warning, because of course things will be changed in 2018 and scenes and materials are not backwards compatible. So there's processes that you have to go through if you want to save out stuff from 2018 and convert it into an earlier format. You get this warning which asks you if you want to create a copy, which basically gives you a pre-2018 backup of your scene. So if you save over it, you're then not in a bind when you come to try and open it again in 2015 or 11 or whatever. But we're not going to bother with that, so I'm going to click on no. And here we see we've got a couple of things missing like kappa 2, so let's just no to all and we'll just see what we get. So here's our scene. Let's bring up the VPR. So there we are, loaded and starting to resolve and render, and we can see straight away that it's a bit different than we had previously in 2015. So let's take a look at the stuff we want to do. Well, first of all, color space. Let's make sure that we're doing this all in the proper color space. So let's set this to sRGB. Righto, straight away that gives us something a little bit better there. Let's look at our backdrop. So we've got an image world, which is a kitchen HDR image, so that's grand. We'll probably see if we go into the GI options that of course we have enabled GI on here, so of course that's where our scene lighting has come from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that off. Look at my scene editor. I can see that I've got a key light here which is currently disabled. I'm going to turn that on. That's probably a distant light. Yes it is. So I'm going to turn that into an environment. Make sure that I'm sampling the backdrop, and I'm going to set it down to an intensity of 1. So that now is giving me my background illumination without GI. So that's a nice little start there. Okay, let's take a look at some of these surfaces, shall we? So pop up in our surface editor. Let's first of all grab all of our guys here. We're going to go to shading model. We're going to make sure that glossy reflections is turned on for everything and they're set to ray trace only. Jump back over to the material here and we can see that we've got things like our car paint. So let's have a little look at that. We can see that all of that is coming out pretty much the same. We haven't got any real changes there. Obviously the material itself is different, but our actual node network is pretty much the same. We've got our glass, that's all looking good. One obvious one that's gone wrong is of course the stripy marble here, front and centre, and we can see that that's the stripes material here, which for some reason was being controlled by this gradient, but it's become unhooked during our import. We just plug that back in and we can see our colour stripes are reappearing there, so that's very nice. We've then got this marble over here, this glass one with the twists inside, and that's supposed to have coloured twists, and we can see that the dielectric material is slightly different in 2018, so the colour that was originally there has come over to our transmittance. So let's right click on that and control click it there, so that goes into colour, and so basically we're just copying the transmittance colour to the actual glass colour for each of these four like this. Go, and so we can see that we've now got our coloured whorls inside our glass there. This guy over here, that's just the bubbly glass, that's just, purely clear here. Of course, our swirly marble has come out still the same, and the only one remaining is the marble white, which was previously using the Kappa material. So what we'll do is let's just bin that off entirely, shall we? And we're going to bring in principled on this guy. What was he? Let's say nearly white, perhaps a very light cream sort of colour, something like that. Let's give him a bit more roughness, perhaps 40%. There we can see that's starting to soften out the highlight some, much like we saw back in 2015. The specular will keep high. Kappa, if you remember, at least I believe I remember, was a slightly subsurface type shader, so let's give them a bit of subsurface, shall we? Let's say 40%. Not hugely noticeable because it is just a sphere, so you're not getting, although you are getting transmittance through because of the subsurface scattering, it's not going to be hugely noticeable, but it's slightly softer there. After that, let's give them a slight bluey tinged subsurface colour, shall we? Bit of an artistic license there, we can start to see that coming through now. There we are, perhaps that's a little too deep, so let's bring this down to, let's say, 30 millimeters of depth. And there we go. We'll just allow this to resolve out. Look at some of our appearance here and see that it's a little bit noisy in the odd place. Nothing too crazy. It's mostly noticeable over here on the white marble. Pop open our render properties, go for an extra reflection sample, an extra refraction one, let's say 4 scattering samples. Set our polygon intersection to fastest just because that'll speed up our renderer a little bit. Let's check our camera properties. Let's go for a minimum of 2, maximum of 12. We'll leave the adaptive sampling on. And there we go. After a little time, our scene is looking quite nice, and that's basically us getting our scene from pre-2018 into 2018, making some changes to the way that the lighting is done, checking through our materials, little updates along the way, and we get ourselves a nice and lovely result. So here we are in 2018, and we've just got a very basic scene, just a plane and a few objects loaded here. We can hit VPR and we see what we get just as standard here with the default settings. Everything's kind of bright and kind of white, so let's have a look at exactly what we're gonna do with all of these guys. Shaded for a minute. So first things first, let's go back to our color space settings and make sure that we are, of course, in the sRGB preset, so everything is nice and proper there. Secondly, we're doing an outside sort of scene, it's just stuff somewhere in space. There's no actual interior or anything here. So let's get our light and we'll convert that over to being an environment type. Again, we'll put the intensity at 1. Make sure sample backdrop is on there. And now let's hit VPR and see what is different. Okay, also still very bright. We're going to have GI on because that's a default here. So let's turn that off since we're using the environment light. We don't need that. That speeds things up nicely for us. Okay, so there we are. Basic objects, basic background, and just some simple plain grey standard surfaces we'll find here. There they are, just all at 212. We're going to do some surfacing on these guys, so let's set their shading model first. We'll make sure that glossy reflections are on and reflection is ray trace only. And next we've just got a plain old gradient backdrop, so let's jump into the effects panel here and give ourselves an actual backdrop. So I'm going to use a textured environment, bring up a texture, going to be an image map, load up. Let's go for the Ditch River HDR. This is one of those off of SIBL. We'll set that to texture axis Y and the projection to spherical. So there we get a nice surround like that. Spin it on heading to change where the sun is. Sun behind our camera, shall we? So we're sort of facing onto the objects there a bit. There we go. That's the basics of a nice little scene set up there with an HDR background. So we've got our, HDR, environment light, and already just with plain old surfacing, things here are looking very pretty. We can see, look at this, the lovely soft shadows coming off there, all of the nice shading, and that is of course just with some very plain basic shading. So let's have a look at a couple of our materials that we have here. So let's start out with Buddha here, shall we, in the center. Pick him, we'll just zoom in on him like that. See him, let's see. Now what shall we make our Buddha? Let's go for the Delta material, shall we? This is a very nice, straightforward, simple material. Energy conserving, reciprocal and fully PBR. Let's give it a colour. How about a nice sort of emerald green here for our Buddha? That looks rather nice. Give him a bit more specularity. Let's say 16% for a rough guess, shall we? There we are, we're getting some nice reflections off of our backdrop now. And let's make him slightly roughened. At the minute he's 25%, so he's fairly a little bit rough, but we can still see that in many areas his reflections are still quite sharp. So let's turn that up a bit. Let's try 60. There we go. That's getting some nice soft reflections now. Would we like a bit of transparency? Let's have a look. 30%. Getting something a bit glassy. I'm not so sure that I fancy that, so we're just going to go for no transparency and we'll just stick with that. And maybe its roughness is a bit high, so I'm going to bring that down to 35. There we go. Nice little sort of polished stone type of material there on our Buddha. Quick and easy. Right, let's jump over to this figurine, the naked lady here next. How's about, since she's a naked lady, let's give skin a little whirl, shall we? An unusual choice perhaps for what's meant to be a little statuette, but there we go nonetheless. There we are, looks reasonably nice. Let's crank it up a bit, shall we? So we'll make it a little bit waxy. Let's just use one layer of subsurface scattering here, so we'll turn the sub and hypodermis down there to just 0%. We'll crank our epidermis to 100%, and let's give it a bit more depth. Let's say 25 millimeters. And now we're starting to get a very soft, waxy type effect there, very subsurface scattery. Let's bring the roughness down, so it's just a little bit more shiny. Same with the sheen. Let's just decrease the actual specular weight, shall we? Let's bring that down to 30. Actually, let's just kill off the sheen. There we go, a slightly soapy, waxy texture there. Not a great amount of shine through, because obviously she's not lit from behind, at least not that strongly. Right, let's have a look at our fish. Little fish statue. May as well check out the car paint shader, mightn't we? So let's just pop that straight on. Look at that, looks gorgeous right from the start. Let's bring up the flake scale. Let's try it at 20 millimeters. Bring up the density. Let's make him a little bit iridescent, shall we? 50%. Perhaps push him more into the pinky, purpley sort of tone. Yeah, quite an attractive looking little fish sculpture. Let's go over to the Madonna and Child little sculpture that we've got here. Now let's use the principled here. We haven't used that yet. Let's make it very near white, something of a grey. There we go, principled material looks very nice. Let's bring up the roughness considerably, shall we? Let's go for about 60. Let's have a bit of subsurface on here, maybe 40%. Make the subsurface colour bright white. Let's give it a distance, let's say, I don't know, 400 mil perhaps. There we go, that's softening that off a little bit for us there. Let's just make it a little marbly stony, so we'll pop straight into the nodes. Find the good old marble procedural there. Pop that into colour. There you go, the scale's a bit large, so let's just bring that down to 100 mil. There we are, that shows up a bit better. Let's change the coloration. So we'll make it from slightly cream, this again, almost white grey. And let's get a crackle procedural in there, shall we? And give it a bit of bump texture. Again, let's bring it down smaller. Good, but it's quite strong. Let's bring the amplitude down, let's say 35%. There we go, we get this sort of slightly stony type surfacing there. Grand. Let's pop open to the Greek fella here, the Ajax statue. Let's make him also principled, I think. How about go for a nice deep red on this guy? We'll cast him into a sort of a resin type plastic, I think. So let's bring the roughness right down, so 5%. Let's bring his specular up, let's say 65. And let's have some specular tint, shall we? Let's say 75. Oh, maybe a bit strong there on the tint. Let's bring that down, 45. There we go, we get this sort of resin type look to him. That's very nice. Let's give him some clear coat on top, shall we? So let's say perhaps 50% clear coat. We'll keep the clear coat gloss high at 100% there. Lovely, so we get this nice sort of double specular on him there. Right, let's pop over to Julius Caesar. No, sorry, it's David. What am I saying? How's about we go with conductor? We'll make him a nice strong metal. Chrome seems like a nice good sort of colour to have him. Chrome steel. Maybe we'll just roughen him up a bit, shall we? So let's try him at 60% roughness. There we go. So now we're into this sort of soft aluminium. Lovely stuff there. Let's have a look at the old Stanford Dragon. How's about dielectric? We haven't used that yet. A nice glass dragon, I think. There we go. Currently clear glass. Let's give him some colour. How about a nice blue? We'll set the transmittance to a paler blue there. And we'll keep the roughness down. And refraction index is fine there at 1.5. Perhaps we can set transmittance a little bit higher, say 500 millimeters. There we go, that makes him a little bit clearer. Lovely, and then we've just got the old Sphinx here. Let's jump back to principled because it's pretty wonderful. Let's go for a gold, shall we? So let's just try a yellow there. We'll turn the metallic up to basically 100%. Pop his specular to 100%. Let's make his roughness a little bit higher so he's slightly soft. Let's try 30. There we go, slightly gentler specular softening there. Perhaps the colour's a little bit off. Let's bring the saturation down some, perhaps there. Lovely. Right, how about our ground? Let's do something with that, shall we? So we've got the plane. Let's bring that to be principled. Let's just give it a... Actually, let's just leave it there on the grey, shall we? Got a nice bit of specular reflection, so let's bring that roughness right up so we get a nice blurry sort of ground plane there. 25%, perhaps a bit strong. 50 is okay, but we'll probably want more specular. Let's try 80% specularity. Maybe less roughness. There we go. Now we're getting noticeable but very soft and gentle reflections there. Wonderful. Let's open our render properties and we'll just tweak some of our sampling here. So let's have 2 reflection and refraction samples, and the subsurface on that statuette needed a good few, so let's set those at 6, shall we? And we'll come over to our camera here, bring up its properties, 1, 8, let's go for 112. Actually, I'm just going to adjust the floor down to a darker colour so everything reflects more clearly in it. Give a little bit of contrast between the ground and our items. And then let's just throw in a little bit of extra lighting, so let's bring up our GI options. We're going to turn off sample backdrop because we're using a environment light. As I say, we'll get to details like that later. Let's turn on enable GI. We'll leave it as brute force and non-interpolated, and let's just give it 4 rays because that should be ample for what we've got going on here. Let's give our lighting a little bit of a boost. I'm going to pop into the image editor, get our ditch river. I'm just going to come over to the editing tab here, and I'm just going to push up its brightness a little bit. Since of course that's what we're using for our lighting, then we can easily push the brightness just by increasing the brightness of our background image. If we were wanting to not wash out the backdrop as we've done there, then of course, you know, we could just not do that. Of course, set that to as it was, and instead, of course, just tweak our lighting. That would push us a little bit out of, normalcy, because the lighting would be slightly over bright for the actual image that we've got loaded. So I tend to prefer it the other way round, but sometimes pushing your lighting from the light itself can be okay. So there we have it. You can see our objects rendering up there, and you see pretty much how quick and simple and easy it is to just throw an object in, throw on some lighting, get a surface, and have it come out looking really good in 2018. Obviously, we've talked about all of the PBR stuff, the energy conservation, the balancing diffuse and specular and Fresnel effects and micro surfaces and all of that. But you'll notice that we haven't done any fiddling around in the nodes here to, set any of that stuff up for ourselves. Most of these materials that we've been using are fully PBR ready. They handle it all for us. When we're tweaking the specular, the diffuse is automatically done. The Fresnel effect is automatically taken care of for us. As we're adding roughness, the differences that happen to the Fresnel effect because of the roughness of the surface are automatically accounted for. You really can see the speed and ease with which you can just start lighting and surfacing in 2018 and getting great photorealistic results pretty much just like that. Of course, we've tweaked with a lot of settings, and I've said, set this and set that, and haven't really explained any of it. Of course, as I said before, we will come to this in the whole tools and techniques section, where we will explain all of these switches and what they mean and what they're for and where you usually want to use them and the cases where you might wish to violate them and all of that. And then, of course, in the project section, we'll get into doing much more involved, full scenes from beginning to end in 2018. And so it is on to those things that we will be moving next, and this pretty much wraps up the foundation section of this training. Hope it's given you a good overview of what's available in LightWave 2018 and of course how accessible and easy it is to work with. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next section.